Do we have more time, TJ? Are there any more questions or comments or things like this? That's the reason for the book, The Crossroads of Conflict. Next to the last chapter in The Crossroads of Conflict is toward a unified theory of conflict resolution, but it's an effort to do what I just said. So you just read the chapter by hearing that. Not really, but that's basically what it says. Eleni.
Okay, so everyone can hear. Okay, so what if you're working with the Tsar?
I'm sorry?
If you're working with the Tsar,
yeah,
and all the peasants have gathered together and they have all the stones and they're ready to throw them, and they've announced that they're going to throw the stones. So now you're advising the Tsar to have a dialogue, but the peasants just believe it's another power play.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the way it works. We're assuming that there's no system. But the truth is the Tsar is as much trapped by the system as the peasants are and can't move out of it. And we actually kind of know that on some level. But what we need to do is we need to expand our idea of what a system is and try to create something that reduces the amount of chronic conflict. And we actually have an answer to that, at least a partial answer. And the partial answer right now is, at a political level, democracy is what gives you the lowest amount of chronic conflict. Not just formal democracy, but authentic participatory democracy in which human beings get together and really actively interact with each other in their communities and step up and say, here's what I want, and work it through and dialogue with each other. So we're not actually in favor of eliminating conflict. We're in favor of recognizing that conflict is what I call the sound made by the cracks in a system. And therefore, it's a little arrow pointing directly at what needs to be fixed in order to reduce if you think of electrical potential, the conflict potential of this particular system. Conflict, it turns out, like electromagnetism, like gravity, is a field. Very simple concept. It's just a field. You've seen what a magnetic field looks like because you've seen those little lines of force around a magnet. You take a magnet and put a piece of paper over it and sprinkle iron filings and you'll see these lines of force. That's a field. And the field diminishes with the square of the distance. So if it's gravity, it's the gravitation, the formula is the gravitational constant, mass 1 times mass 2 divided by r squared. R squared is radius squared, which means the distance from the center of the gravity. It's exactly the same formula for electromagnetism. It's
too
the
late
inverse
for
square law.
electromagnetism, Ken.
I'm sorry.
It's way too late for electromagnetism.
You're right. Sorry about that. Skip that. Okay. Erase. So what do we do about the Tsar and the peasants? The answer is, as long as they remain Tsars and peasants, most that we can do is to create some form of temporary peace. But this is a little bit like the disruption in the Earth's crust with 2 plates. Sorry, won't go too far with that one. Where sooner or later the pressure is going to come out. And therefore, we desperately need a mechanism whereby society, meaning all of society, can learn from its chronic conflicts and find ways to evolve. Now here's the problem. Tsarism is a system. And the first commandment of all systems is to defend themselves and to reproduce. Right? It doesn't matter what the system is. It can be an intellectual system, a family system, or relational system. The idea is keep it going and reproduce it. So this is, of course, something that produces a consequence as you go along. Let me give a specific example. We have a little bit of a Tsar in the CEO and a little bit of the peasant in the people who work at the bottom of the organization. And we can even think of Regis University, God forbid, as being like this. But in point of fact, most of the organizations that we have are set up this way. So what do we know from communication theory about what is going to happen to any conversation that wants to get from the CEO down to the people who are at the bottom? And the answer is it's going to get distorted, of course, because it's traveling through all these different layers and everybody changes it. And then what's going to happen to all the messages from the bottom that want to get to the top? Well, they can't all make it. So which one is going to? And the answer is whichever one serves the interests of their manager and gets passed on, or whichever one has the squeaky wheel and gets the oil, right? But in other words, this helps to explain the system that we create. Then we add in a second piece, which is, where are most of the problems that have to be solved in this organization encountered? And the answer is at the bottom. And then where is the problem-solving authority concentrated? And the answer is at the top. And then there's a final piece before seeing that this whole thing is massively dysfunctional and has to generate chronic conflicts, and that's this. You created a complex structure. How complex and multifaceted is the feedback loop? And the answer is not very, because feedback goes from the top down. Your boss evaluates you. You don't evaluate your boss, right, in most organizations. But if you don't do that, it means that the people at the top have to be out of sync with the environment. There's no choice. Sooner or later, it's going to hit them, because you can't possibly get all those messages, and you can't possibly have the feedback that you need to know what is actually happening. Therefore, how does this lack of feedback and this being out of sync with the environment show up? The answer is as conflicts. So this is a systemic problem. And here's the danger that we run into. It's the danger of the people who tried to prevent the Civil War by continuing to guarantee the existence of slavery. It's the danger of Chamberlain in Munich going to mediate with Hitler over the fate of the Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia, which wasn't present in the mediation. This is the danger that we face with this. So this is where we have to fundamentally rethink what it is that we are doing. If what we are doing is simply trying to create peace for the sake of peace, there is a limit in the value of that, and the limit is created by oppression, if you will. I mean, there are a series of different ways of defining it. That's one way of defining it. And this is where Laura Nader comes from. She's a cultural anthropologist. She has a critique of mediation, and her critique is a phrase: trading justice for harmony. It's a valid critique in many instances. Certainly it's valid of Munich. Justice was traded for harmony. There's no question about it. There's no question that Henry Clay did this in American history. And that's why we had the Fugitive Slave Act. That's why we had the Missouri Compromise. It's why we had the Civil War. Because ultimately what was shifting was the czar and the peasant and that relationship with each other. And that could only be expressed violently because mechanisms for resolving it non-violently either did not exist or were prevented from existing. But here's how I think of the difference. It's a very simple difference. Under the Fugitive Slave Act, passed by the United States Congress as a part of the Compromise of 1850, any Southern slave owner could go into any northern state, seize any free black person, claim that they were a runaway slave, take them into federal court, and in federal court, the slave had no right to speak. There was no federal habeas corpus. The slave had no right to speak. And all you have to do is look at that one thing. The slave has no right to speak, and you realize that simple procedural rule recreated slavery. And if you had another simple procedural rule that says the slave has a right to speak, you just destroyed slavery, right? With one procedural rule. Isn't that profound? I mean, this tiny little thing makes a difference, whether you have the right to speak or you don't. So in a very similar kind of a way, what we need to find, I wrote another book, which is